Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. I woke up to the sharp beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile scent of disinfectant. My mouth was dry, my limbs heavy, and the ache in my chest wasn't just physical. It was surgical. Cancer, they had called it. A lump, then a diagnosis, then a whirlwind of tests and surgery. But none of that prepared me for the emptiness I felt in that hospital bed. He wasn't there. My husband, the man who once vowed in sickness and in health, was gone. I blinked against the ceiling lights, trying to convince myself he had just gone to grab coffee. Or maybe he didn't know I was out of surgery yet. Maybe the nurses hadn't called him in time. But then the nurse walked in holding a bouquet of tulips, my favorite, and a sealed envelope. "These came for you," she said softly, placing them by my side. The handwriting on the envelope was his. Familiar, rushed, slightly tilted. I could still picture him scribbling notes in our kitchen, using the fridge door as a leaning post. I tore it open with trembling hands. The first words blurred into static. "I'm sorry." He couldn't do it, he wrote. Couldn't watch me waste away. It wasn't what he signed up for. He needed light in his life. Someone who made him feel alive, not someone who reminded him of death. He said he loved me, but love wasn't enough anymore. He needed peace, freedom. By the time I reached the second page, my hands were shaking. He had moved out. Not was going to. Not might. He already had. Days ago. While I lay unconscious, he packed up his things, left our apartment keys in the mailbox, and disappeared. But he hadn't gone far. There was another woman. Someone comforting. Someone less heavy. Someone who didn't bleed through her hospital gown and need help to walk to the bathroom. The tulips felt like a joke. He used to bring them home after fights or on Fridays just because. He once said they reminded him of me, bright, soft, resilient. Now they sat limp in that hospital vase like a mockery of every lie he'd ever told me. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been stitched shut. Instead, I stared at the tiled ceiling, letting his words echo inside my skull like a funeral dirge for a marriage I thought was unbreakable. The doctor came in later with gentle eyes and hopeful results. They'd removed the mass successfully. "You're going to be okay," he said. But I wasn't. I was 32, bald, stitched, half-drugged, and alone. The man I'd slept beside for 7 years had decided my fight was too inconvenient. My survival didn't inspire him, it exhausted him. I turned my face toward the wall and closed my eyes, pretending to sleep while the world kept moving without me. He hadn't just left me. He'd chosen her. While I fought for my life, he had chosen peace, escape, and a woman who didn't remind him of mortality. And somehow that hurt more than the diagnosis ever did. He used to call me his angel. I remember the first time he said it. His voice breathless, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe I was real. We were sitting on the floor of his crumbling apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes and piles of his failed business plans. The heat didn't work. His fridge was a rusted mess. But I didn't care. I was young, in love, and sure I'd found someone worth betting my entire life on. "You're like a miracle," he whispered, brushing hair from my face. "You walked into my mess and didn't flinch. You saved me." And I believed him. I held that sentence like a jewel in my heart, polishing it every time things got hard. Like when I turned down a job offer in Boston to stay close to him while he launched his third startup. Or when I spent my entire savings on rent and groceries so he could focus on his vision. I became the one-man cheerleading squad, cook, secretary, therapist, and partner. His dream became our dream. And when it finally paid off, when he landed investors and his app hit traction, he held me close and said, "We did this together." Back then, I used to get little notes from him on Post-its. "You're my fuel. I'd be lost without you. Best thing that ever happened to me." But everything started to shift the day I fainted in the kitchen. I brushed it off at first, low blood sugar, maybe stress. But the fatigue didn't leave. My skin went dull. My hair brittle. I'd sleep for 12 hours and still feel hollow. Eventually, I went in for tests. Cancer. It wrapped itself around my body like a slow, choking fog. But I remember thinking, not me. I'm too young. Too healthy. We had plans. I hadn't even finished decorating the guest room. And yet, there it was, an enemy in my own blood already building its camp. He was quiet during the drive home. No hand-holding, no comforting words, just silence. His jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. That night he didn't come to bed. Said he needed to process. I thought it was fear. Shock? That maybe he just didn't know how to handle it. So I made excuses. I told my friends he was just tired. Told my mother he was supportive. Told myself that love meant patience and everyone grieves differently. But days turned into weeks and his presence became logistical. He'd ask about test results like he was checking inventory. What stage is it again? How long's the treatment? What's the success rate? He started working late again, claiming stress. I'd sit alone on the couch, bald and nauseous, pretending not to notice the text notifications lighting up his phone across the room. I found perfume on his jacket once. Not mine. He said it was a client. I said nothing. I still wore the bracelet he gave me on our first anniversary. For my angel, it was engraved. I used to kiss it before appointments like a charm. But somewhere along the line, I realized I was praying to a ghost. During chemo, I'd hold the plastic armrest and close my eyes, picturing the early days. His laugh. The way he used to carry me to bed when I fell asleep on the couch. The way he used to say we instead of you. But slowly I became her. Her results. Her illness. Her treatments. Like I was a problem to manage. He stopped saying I was his miracle. And I stopped being one. The man who once said he'd walk through hell for me now couldn't sit in a hospital room without checking his watch. He avoided my eyes when I cried. He kissed my forehead like I was made of glass. He started to pull away piece by piece, until the only thing he left behind was his absence. And still I defended him. Because when you build your life around someone else's heartbeat, you don't notice when yours starts to fade. I should have sent someone else. But something in me needed to see it one last time. To walk through those rooms and feel the echoes for myself before cutting the final thread. The apartment we once called home hadn't changed. Same flower box outside the window. Same cracked tile in the entryway I kept meaning to fix. Same key under the mat like muscle memory. Only now it didn't feel like I was returning, it felt like I was trespassing. I stepped inside expecting coldness, emptiness, maybe dust. But the air was warm, lived in, and scented light, floral, familiar. For a second I couldn't place it. But then I did. It was my perfume. Not just the same brand. The exact one I had worn on our honeymoon, layered carefully before bed, just for him. I froze in the doorway, fingers clutching the strap of my overnight bag like a lifeline. I heard laughter down the hall. A soft voice. And then she appeared. She walked out of our bedroom barefoot, hair slightly damp from a shower, and wearing them, my silk wedding pajamas. Ivory with embroidered lace cuffs. I'd spent weeks choosing them, had them monogrammed with our initials. She twirled slightly, humming, completely unaware of who I was. And I? Forgot how to breathe. She didn't recognize me. Why would she? I was pale, thinner, visibly ill. Nothing like the glowing bride from the framed photo still sitting on the hallway table. The photo she probably dusted this morning. Oh, sorry, are you here to drop something off? She asked kindly, smiling like I was a guest. I couldn't speak. My eyes darted past her, toward the bedroom door cracked open behind her. I saw our bed, the one we saved for. The one he once carried me into, promising forever. Her clothes were folded on my chair. Her handbag rested where I used to keep my journal. My husband, my ex, stepped out seconds later, towel around his neck, and froze when he saw me. His eyes didn't widen.
No guilt. No shame.
Just mild irritation. I told you I'd drop the box off this weekend, he said, calm as you please, like I'd just shown up early to a brunch date. I blinked. She turned to him. Oh, is this? He cut her off with a kiss to the cheek. This is just someone from my past. It's fine. Why don't you go finish your tea? She smiled again. To me. I'll let you two talk. She disappeared into the kitchen, humming, the scent of my perfume trailing after her. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to sob, but instead I looked him dead in the eye and whispered, "She's wearing my name." He shrugged. They were just pajamas. You left them. No. I left them folded in the drawer we both agreed not to open, out of respect. They weren't forgotten. They were sacred. He walked past me, grabbed the box I'd come for and set it by my feet. Here. You said you wanted your sketchbooks. I didn't move. You're not supposed to be here, he added flatly. The wall clock ticked loudly behind him. The same one we hung during our first argument, when we couldn't agree where it should go. We ended up laughing so hard we left it crooked. And now? It was perfectly straight. I crouched, slowly picking up the box. My fingers brushed the corner, and I caught a glimpse of something inside, our wedding guestbook. The one I thought I lost. The page was folded open to a message from my late father. I'm proud of you. He's lucky. The weight of that sentence made my knees buckle. You lied to everyone, I said quietly. He didn't respond, just rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, You always did dramatize things. And somehow that broke me more than the affair, more than the pajamas, more than the silence. I stood. The weight in my chest made it hard to hold my head up, but I did. I looked at the man I once gave everything to, the man who now hid behind a teacup and a stranger, and said, You didn't replace me. You erased me. Then I walked out. And not once did he try to stop me. Grief doesn't knock. It barges in, uninvited and unapologetic, wrecking everything in its path. 1 week it was just the fatigue. The next, the cancer had spread to my lymph nodes. The doctors called it aggressive. I called it betrayal. By my own body, by time, by life itself. I lost my job 2 days later. They said they admired my strength, but needed someone more consistent. Consistent as in not dying. I stared at the HR lady's tight smile and nodded like I understood, even though all I wanted was to curl up under the table and vanish. And then came the call. My dad. Gone. It happened in his sleep. Peaceful, they said. Just didn't wake up. But I knew the truth. He was exhausted. Watching me fall apart had chipped away at him day after day, until there was nothing left to hold him together. I was his only child. His everything. And now he was gone. I planned the funeral on autopilot. Picked the songs. The flowers. Chose a suit I thought he'd like. He always said blue made him feel strong. I found a picture of us from the hospital, from when I still had hair and hope. I printed it and placed it in the front pew, next to the seat he reserved for him. Yes, him. The man who used to call my father Dad. Who'd sit for hours drinking tea with him, trading stock tips and dad jokes like they were real family. I assumed he'd show up. That somewhere inside him the man I once loved still existed. But that seat stayed empty. I waited. Until the end. Through the eulogy. Through the final prayer. Through the cold wind that whipped through the cemetery like punishment. I waited. But he never came. Later that week, I stopped by my old favorite bakery for something sweet. Something to pretend life was normal for 5 minutes. And that's where I saw them. 2 mutual friends whispering near the corner table. I tried to slip out unnoticed, but one caught my eye and waved me over awkwardly. They offered fake smiles and softer than necessary condolences. Then one of them leaned in and said, Did you hear? I blinked. She's pregnant. It took a second for the words to land. She being his new wife. Pregnant. Glowing. Alive. They laughed, not cruelly, just clueless. Then one of them said it. I guess he was right. Can you imagine if he'd stayed with you? I didn't respond. They must have thought I hadn't heard. But I had. Every syllable. He told us he was so glad he didn't stay with a dying woman. I excused myself before the nausea hit. Outside, the cold was sharp, unforgiving. I leaned against the nearest wall and let the weight of it all slam into me. The job. The funeral. The baby. That sentence. Dying woman. It echoed louder than the diagnosis ever did. I tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. My body was too tired, too spent. Everything inside me felt hollowed out, like I was just a shell trying to mimic a life that no longer belonged to me. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if I could hold myself together from the outside. Even my reflection in the bakery window looked like a stranger. Pale. Fading. A ghost of someone who once had a future. I thought of my dad's last voicemail. You're stronger than you think. He believed that. He always believed in me, even when I didn't. But right now, I didn't feel strong. I felt discarded, unwanted, replaced. He hadn't just moved on. He'd rewritten the story. I wasn't the love of his life. I was the cautionary tale, the almost, the broken path he'd managed to escape. And yet, part of me still wanted to believe he'd regret it. Someday. That when he looked at his new life, his pregnant wife, his curated happiness, he'd wonder, even for a moment, what if he had stayed? What if he had fought for me? But deep down I knew. He wouldn't. Because to him I had already died. Survival wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic or beautiful. It was quiet, dull, repetitive. Some days just breathing felt like a full-time job. But I did it anyway. I didn't survive out of spite. I didn't even survive out of hope. I survived because there was nothing else left to do. At first I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't go out. I barely ate. My days were a blur of appointments, prescription refills, and unanswered messages from well-meaning people I no longer trusted. I was too tired to fake resilience. Too hollow to wear that brave face people expected from the girl who got left behind. Then one day someone knocked on my door. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Hanley. She was in her 70s, always wore lavender perfume, and had been widowed for years. I'd barely spoken to her before. But she stood there with a casserole and a small worried smile. "I figured you hadn't eaten something that wasn't from a box in a while," she said. She wasn't wrong. That day turned into a pattern. She'd bring soup. I'd force a spoonful or two. She'd talk about her roses. I'd nod along. Eventually I started listening, then talking, then laughing softly, slowly, like remembering how to be human again. And then there was Dr. Abram. Unlike the others, he didn't talk to me like I was a case file or a countdown. He asked about my art. Not the diagnosis. Not the divorce. My art. "I saw on your chart you used to paint," he said one day while checking my vitals. "Do you still?" I didn't know how to answer. But that night I dug out an old box from the back of my closet. Inside were paintbrushes stiff with time, canvases half finished, tubes of color I once blended like spells. I set up a corner in the living room and stared at a blank canvas for hours. Then I dipped the brush. The first stroke was shaky, hesitant. But then my hand remembered. My heart remembered. The colors bled into each other like old wounds learning to soften. I painted like no one was watching. Because no one was. Weeks passed. My hair grew back, awkward and patchy at first but real. I bought new clothes. Small things. A scarf here. A soft sweater there. Little ways of reclaiming a body I had learned to hate. I began uploading my paintings to a forgotten Instagram account.
No captions.
No tags. Just images. And then one of them took off. A faceless woman lying in a bed of red threads, one hand clenched in pain, the other reaching toward light. I called it unfinished. A blog reposted it. Then another. Then an influencer. Within days my inbox flooded with messages. People saying it made them feel seen. Understood. Like they weren't alone. I wasn't invisible anymore. And then came the email. A prestigious art foundation was looking for a new program lead. Someone to design therapeutic art workshops for trauma survivors. They loved my work. Wanted to meet. Would I be interested? I said yes. Because for the first time in years I wanted to be somewhere. To be someone. When I arrived at the foundation, the building felt oddly familiar. Sleek glass. Black granite walls. A steel logo at the top I'd seen before but dulled now, smaller. It hit me. This was the former headquarters of my ex-husband's startup. The one I gave up my job for. The one I bled for in silence, cooking dinners while he pitched investors and wore my loyalty like a badge. It had gone bankrupt during the recession. And now a nonprofit had taken it over. A place for healing. For rebuilding lives. I walked through the front doors, chin high, hair short, heart beating hard. I passed the front desk, where once I'd sat waiting with coffee and homemade muffins. I passed the elevator where he once kissed my neck and promised I was everything. Now I was more. He hadn't seen my recovery. Hadn't witnessed the slow, quiet resurrection of a woman he deemed too broken to bother with. He probably assumed I disappeared. That I faded into the illness like background noise to his new life. But I hadn't faded. I had bloomed. Not for revenge. Not for pity. For me. For the woman who stared death in the face and chose to live anyway. For the girl who walked out of her own life and built another. Brushstroke by brushstroke. And the irony? What he left behind became the place I found myself again. The first time she called, I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail. It was late, past midnight, and I was curled on the couch with a cup of chamomile and the hum of rain tapping against my window. Peace had finally become a guest in my life, not just a stranger I waved at from a distance. But something made me answer. The silence on the other end wasn't the kind that comes from bad signal. It was the kind that comes from trying not to fall apart. Then a shaky voice, barely above a whisper. Is this her? I didn't speak. I found your number in an old box. It was buried in one of his drawers. I don't even know why I'm calling you. I don't know who else to call. That's when I realized. Her. The woman in my wedding pajamas. The woman who once offered me tea in my own kitchen, who wore my perfume and smiled at me like I was just a shadow from his past. Now she was trembling in the dark, holding onto a piece of me like it was a lifeline. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. He's gone, she continued, her breath hitching. Just vanished. After the bankruptcy hit, everything started unraveling. I found papers, accounts I didn't know existed, loans in my name, credit cards maxed out. I stayed silent, listening to the slow, pitiful collapse of the house of glass she had once replaced me to build. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice cracking. He knew. He knew and still left. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. Of course he did. It wasn't new. He had always disappeared when things got hard. With me it was illness. With her it was failure. He didn't believe in staying, only in surviving. And surviving for him meant discarding anyone who made him feel weak. There's more, she whispered. There's another woman. I found texts, pictures. It's not just me. I felt something deep in my chest shift. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Just confirmation. A quiet, almost mournful acknowledgement that patterns don't change just because the packaging looks shinier. I keep thinking maybe I deserve this, she added, barely audible. For what we did to you. There it was. The thing she had never said aloud. The thing we both danced around that day in the hallway, when she smiled at me like a stranger while wearing my memories. I don't know how to be alone, she said. I don't know who I am without him. I feel like I'm disappearing. I wanted to say so many things. That I had disappeared once too. That I had become invisible in my own story. Rewritten as the villain, the burden, the thing to run from. I wanted to tell her about the nights I screamed into pillows so no one would hear. About how silence nearly drowned me, and how healing tasted bitter before it turned sweet. But I didn't. Instead I said, "You'll survive." She let out a sob. How? By realizing you were never the broken one. There was a long pause. Just breathing. Just rain. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I know. And for a moment I felt something like closure. Not because she suffered. Not because he failed. But because the last piece of that old life had finally crumbled, not under my hand but on its own. I wished her peace, then ended the call. She never called again. And I never needed her to. Hospitals had a scent I could never forget. Not just the sterile tang of bleach and latex, but the memory-saturated kind, of tears on starched sheets, of silence heavy with decisions, of bodies fighting battles quietly under pale fluorescent light. I hadn't walked into one since my last treatment, since I left that final room and swore I'd never return unless it was to celebrate something. And yet here I was. Not for blood work. Not for scans. But for her. The woman who once stood in my kitchen in my wedding pajamas, smiling sweetly as my world cracked beneath my feet. She asked to meet. I didn't say yes right away. I debated ignoring her completely. But then I realized. I wanted to see her. Not out of revenge. Not for pity. But for closure. For myself. When I arrived, she was already sitting in the waiting room, shoulders curled inward, hands clutching her belly like it was the last part of herself that hadn't broken yet. Her face was blotchy, eyes swollen, and her lips trembled as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. I sat across from her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. She looked different now. Hollowed. Worn. She wasn't glowing anymore. The confident sparkle she once wore like armor was gone. And for the first time, she looked like someone who'd finally realized they were just as disposable as the one they stole from. I'm sorry, she whispered. The words hung in the air between us, thin and weak. I didn't know it would end like this, she added. I thought I was different. She wiped her nose with a tissue and stared at the tiled floor. When we met, he told me you were distant, bitter, cold. He made it sound like you pushed him away, like he had no choice. I didn't flinch, because I remembered the stories he told about his exes. They were always too emotional, too dramatic, too selfish. I used to believe him, until I realized I had become one of those women in his stories. He lied, she said, all the time. About money, about his past, about me. Her voice cracked. I found pictures, messages. He's been seeing someone else for months, maybe longer. She sniffed, clutching her stomach tighter. I'm due in 6 weeks, and he's just gone. No note, no message, nothing. I don't know what to do. I have no job, no family nearby. Just bills and this baby and fear. Tears rolled down her cheeks, quiet but endless. I thought I'd feel safe with him, she whispered. I thought I'd built something. I didn't realize I was just a placeholder until he got bored again. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw myself. Years ago, in that same waiting room, numb, hoping, begging the universe to give me something to hold on to when everything else slipped through my fingers. And now she sat where I once did, crumbling. But I wasn't here to save her. She searched my face for something, sympathy maybe, solidarity, forgiveness. All I gave her was truth. He's predictable. 3 words. That's all. She blinked, confused. I stayed too long, I said softly. You came in thinking you'd be the exception. But there are no exceptions for men like him. Just a rotation. She covered her mouth with her hand, like the words stung more because they were true. I don't hate you, I added. But I don't feel sorry for you either. She nodded slowly, ashamed. I stood up. You'll get through it. If you let yourself. But don't wait for him to regret it. He won't. Men like him don't feel regret. Only inconvenience. As I turned to leave, she called out, Do you ever think about him? I paused, my hand on the door. Not anymore. And I meant it. As I stepped into the hallway, something inside me settled. Not a triumphant roar, but a quiet peace. The kind that comes when the past finally stays in the past. The kind that wraps around your spine and lets you walk taller, even when you once crawled to survive. He had rewritten me once as his mistake, his burden, his tragedy. But I'd rewritten myself as the woman who lived. The letter had been tucked inside a sketchbook, between brittle pages stained with old tears and faded paint. I hadn't meant to find it. I was just cleaning, reorganizing my shelves, flipping through forgotten corners of myself when it fell out. Creased, sealed, and still whole. My handwriting on the front was shaky, almost childlike. The ink had bled slightly from my sweaty palms the day I wrote it. I remembered every word before I even broke the seal. But this time I didn't cry. I sat on the floor by the window, sunlight warming my legs, and slowly unfolded the letter I had once thought would save us. To the man I still believe in, it began. I read it aloud, quietly, like reading a bedtime story to a version of myself I no longer recognized. I know I don't look like myself anymore. I know I'm tired and sick and hard to love right now. But I still remember the way you used to laugh when I dance in the kitchen. I still remember your hands brushing the hair from my face. I still believe in us. My voice didn't shake, but my chest did. I'm writing this because I know I've been hard lately. I know it's easier to run than to stay. But I'm asking you just once not to run. Stay. Please stay. I'll heal. I'll fight. For us. I paused, fingers curling tightly around the paper. You once said I was your miracle. I still want to be. The final line sat there begging. Please don't leave me behind. I folded the letter in half. Then again. Then once more. It was never mailed. I never even wrote his name on the front. I'd hidden it away the moment I realized he already had both feet out the door. But part of me had still clung to it, like maybe he'd sense it. Like maybe letters didn't need postage if the ache was loud enough. I stared at it for a while. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where I kept the long matches. The air outside was still. Summer soft. The kind of day that invited closure. I walked to the porch, lit a match, and held the flame under the letter's corner. Caught quickly. The edges curled inward. Words dissolved into ash. The pleading, the hoping, the desperate clinging. I watched it all vanish in orange flickers. I held it until the flame licked my fingers and I had to let go. The final ashes drifted into the sky. And just then my phone buzzed. I glanced down. A message. From a gallery I'd submitted my work to months ago and never heard back. We'd love to feature your piece, unfinished, in our fall exhibition. Your work is deeply moving. Are you available for a call this week? I laughed. Softly. It wasn't poetic justice. It wasn't revenge. It was peace. The letter was gone. And oddly, so was the weight. He would never know what I wrote. He would never hear the words I once believed might bring him back. But now? I didn't need him to. I didn't need him at all. I wiped my hands, grabbed my bag, and walked inside. There was work to prepare. I had a call to schedule. And a life to live.
Mine.